just want to preface this by saying that this is a really short game. It's really good, and the fact that it accomplishes all of this in such a short amount of time is honestly amazing, and in itself is worthy of a lot of praise. Grimhook is a first-person 3D parkour platformer action-adventure thing, where the whole gimmick is your combat and movement abilities originate in the same spot, your enchanted hook. This leads to interesting combat where you can do the regular damage stuff, plus use movement abilities in tandem, allowing for more integration of the movement into combat than what these kind of games can usually achieve. It starts you off beside the wreck of your boat. As you move around, you find your hook, which allows you to climb over some rocks. As you go on, exploring the cavern, you are granted more and more movement abilities, like a double jump, this forward tentacle thing that pushes you up, a wall climb, then you can grapple, bounce and grapple, and so on. You slowly learn how to chain all these things together, to move farther and faster. Honestly, the number of cool things you can do is amazing, and the best part is how effectively and deliberately the game gives them to you. Nothing ever feels overwhelming or complicated, it feels totally natural within the game world, and is paced so immaculately that halfway in you realize, oh shit, I'm using all these cool fucking moves without even thinking. A large part of this comes down to its excellent level design, with visual cues to indicate when to use specific items, subtly telling you what to do next, where to go, and how to do it. This helps with reducing information overload as well, because the player can always rely on the game to remind them how and where to do things like wall running, grappling, tentacle pushing, and more. The levels effortlessly move you from one point to another. You never feel like the route is convoluted or stupid, it always feels very natural. This is in comparison to other games like Ghost Runner, where occasionally I would feel lost as to where to go next, start travelling the complete wrong direction, and it took me ages to set a little grapple point way up on the ceiling. Grimhook almost never encounters this problem, and when it does, every time it was because I didn't understand an ability properly and kept failing a jump. You can feel how passionate the people making this game were. Another great part of the game is the combat. By the time you have gotten to the first combat area, you have already gained the ability to grapple and to chain things to progress, and you have also learned that you can kind of jump on them to gain more height. The game utilizes this in a creative way by making the combat entirely focused on hitting enemies from a relatively large distance away a few times. Then the enemy flies into the air and you can grapple onto them normally and finish them off by colliding into them and bouncing. It's a satisfying way of utilizing already existing mechanics established earlier and reimagining their use cases for a combat setting. This makes the combat feel crunchy, satisfying, and a blast to play because the grapple mechanic itself is already all these things. The enemies shoot little pellets that damage you. This turns the game into a bullet hell, which allows you to use the movement abilities in combat strategically to avoid the bullets. This adds another layer of depth to combat, which is honestly sorely needed. The combat mechanics are creative and fun, but on my second playthrough they started to feel a bit monotonous. The combat could really use another layer of depth, something like being able to hit multiple enemies at the same time, or another way of taking enemies out would just add another layer of depth to the combat, that right now it is sorely missing. Having said that, however, I can totally see how that would probably be too much to fit into the game's already condensed runtime. One of the ways the game enhances the combat is by rewarding you for hitting enemies. It does this by granting you a bit more time in the air as you're bouncing around. This rewards the player for engaging in combat and makes it easier to move on to the next enemy and continue the chain. This heightens the enjoyment of combat and allows for long periods of just pure speed and fighting. Another stunning element of the game is in its presentation. It's not the most impressive game graphically, and it could use a bit more optimization, but where it shines is in its massive set pieces that create a beautiful backdrop to your gameplay. Sound is another strong element of the game. The beautiful echoing music feels right at home in the environment, and the sound effects feel satisfying, if a bit limited. Music also isn't afraid of getting a bit more edgy and techno around the combat parts, and leans into the more action-centric parts of the game. The voice acting is actually pretty good.
You won't get out of this cave without my help.
And I can see the characters becoming really interesting in a full release later on. On the whole, Grimhook is a creative, beautiful, satisfying, and most of all fun game that is partly limited by its short nature and some performance issues. Solid 8 out of 10.